The thermometer read -52 degrees Celsius when wildlife photographer Marcus Rivera discovered something that would change his life forever. Deep in the Yukon Territory, 300 miles from the nearest human settlement, he found fresh tracks in the snow that shouldn't exist. Wolf tracks, but not just any wolf tracks. These were massive, nearly twice the size of any wolf he'd ever documented, and they led directly to something that made his blood freeze in his veins: the wreckage of a small bush plane. Smoke still rising from its twisted metal frame. Marcus had been tracking a pack of Arctic wolves for his National Geographic assignment when he spotted the crash site from a ridge overlooking the valley. Through his telephoto lens, he could see the pilot slumped over the controls, clearly dead from impact. But there was something else moving near the wreckage: a baby. Somehow, impossibly, an infant was crawling through the snow near the crashed plane, wearing nothing but a thin blanket and what looked like traditional indigenous winter clothing. The child should have been dead from exposure within minutes in these conditions, but it was moving, crying, very much alive, and standing guard over it was the largest wolf Marcus had ever seen. The wolf's fur was pure white, thick as Arctic fox fur, and its massive frame suggested it weighed at least 200 pounds. Most remarkably, it showed no aggression toward the human infant. Instead, it was gently nosing the baby back toward the warmth of the still-burning wreckage. Whenever the child crawled too far into the snow, Marcus adjusted his camera's telephoto lens, hardly believing what he was witnessing. In 20 years of wildlife photography, he'd never seen behavior like this. Wolves were predators, not babysitters. That's when he saw the second set of tracks. These were different, darker somehow, as if the snow itself had been stained by whatever made them. They circled the crash site at a distance, clearly stalking, but something was keeping their maker at bay. The white wolf suddenly raised its massive head, ears pricked forward, looking directly at Marcus's position on the ridge. Even from 300 yards away, he could see its eyes, not the typical yellow of a wolf, but deep amber, almost golden, burning with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The wolf's behavior changed instantly. It began pacing around the baby in tight circles, its hackles raised, a low growl carrying across the frozen air. Something had it spooked. Then Marcus heard it, a sound that made every primitive instinct in his body scream danger. A howl, but not from the white wolf. This came from somewhere deeper in the forest, echoing off the mountains with a resonance that seemed to carry malevolent intelligence. The white wolf's response was immediate. It gently but firmly gripped the back of the baby's clothing in its massive jaws and began moving away from the crash site, carrying the infant like a mother wolf would carry her pup. Marcus made his decision. Abandoning his photography equipment, he started down the ridge as fast as the deep snow would allow. Whatever was happening down there, that baby needed human help. He just hoped he could reach them before whatever was making those dark tracks decided to attack. By the time Marcus reached the valley floor, the white wolf and baby were gone. Only the smoking wreckage remained, along with those disturbing dark tracks that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Up close, he could see that whatever made these tracks had claws at least 4 inches long. The crashed plane was a Cessna 180, the kind used by bush pilots to reach remote areas. The registration number was partially obscured by damage, but Marcus could make out enough to know this wasn't a scheduled flight. The pilot was native, probably in his 50s, wearing traditional winter gear beneath his flight jacket. In the passenger area, Marcus found a car seat secured with climbing rope, clearly improvised for transporting an infant. Scattered around were baby supplies, formula, diapers, warm clothing, and something that made his heart race: medical records. The papers were partially burned, but he could make out enough to understand the situation. The baby, a girl, apparently, had been a patient at Vancouver Children's Hospital. The documents mentioned experimental treatment and genetic anomalies, but most of the specific medical information was illegible. What he could read clearly was a transportation order signed by someone at Health Canada, authorizing the movement of patient X47 to secure research facility. Yellowknife. The date was today. The realization hit him like an Arctic wind. This wasn't a rescue mission. Someone had been transporting this baby to a government research facility when the plane went down. A sound behind him made Marcus spin around. The white wolf had returned, watching him from 50 feet away. The baby was nowhere to be seen, which meant the wolf had hidden her somewhere safe. "Easy," Marcus said softly, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm here to help." The wolf studied him with those impossible amber eyes, its massive head tilted slightly as if evaluating his intentions. After what felt like an eternity, it made a decision. The wolf turned and began walking deeper into the forest, pausing every few steps to look back at Marcus. The message was clear: follow me. Marcus grabbed what supplies he could carry from the wreckage: baby formula, blankets, an emergency medical kit, and followed the white wolf into the wilderness. Behind them, those dark tracks began moving again, circling closer to the crash site. They walked for over an hour through terrain that should have been impassable. The wolf seemed to know exactly where solid ground lay beneath the deep snow, choosing a path that kept them moving efficiently despite the brutal conditions. Finally, they reached what appeared to be an old trapper's cabin, half buried in snow but still structurally sound. Smoke was rising from its chimney. Someone had recently built a fire. The wolf led him to the door and then, incredibly, used its massive paw to push it open. Inside, Marcus found the baby lying on a bed of furs near a stone fireplace, sleeping peacefully despite the sub-zero temperatures. She looked to be about 8 months old, with dark hair and skin that suggested indigenous heritage. What struck him most were her eyes when she briefly opened them, the same deep amber as the wolf's. As night fell over the Yukon wilderness, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what he'd stumbled into. The white wolf refused to leave the cabin, positioning itself between the baby and the single window, ears constantly pricked for sounds from outside. Marcus had managed to get the baby fed and changed using supplies from the crash site. The infant was remarkably calm, showing none of the distress he'd expect from a child who'd just survived a plane crash and been carried through freezing wilderness by a wolf. "What's your story, little one?" he murmured, checking her temperature with a forehead thermometer from the medical kit. Perfectly normal, despite everything she'd been through. The wolf's sudden growl made him look up. Through the cabin's frosted window, he could see shapes moving in the darkness. Not one, but several large forms circling the building at a distance. Marcus had brought his camera gear inside, and now he attached his most powerful telephoto lens, using its night vision capabilities to get a better look at what was stalking them. What he saw made his blood freeze. The creatures looked like wolves, but wrong in every possible way. Their fur was so black it seemed to absorb moonlight, and they moved with an unnatural coordination that suggested intelligence beyond normal pack behavior. Most disturbing were their eyes, not the typical reflection he'd expect from wolf eyes at night, but actual sources of yellow light, like burning coals. 7 of them, he whispered to the white wolf, who acknowledged his words with a slight turn of its massive head. They're coordinating, setting up positions around the cabin. The white wolf rose to its full height easily, full feet at the shoulder, and began pacing near the door. Its behavior suggested it was preparing for battle, not flight. Marcus checked his supplies. A basic survival knife, a flare gun with 3 rounds, and his emergency satellite phone. The phone showed no signal this deep in the wilderness, but it was worth trying. As he fumbled with the device, the baby began to stir. Her amber eyes opened and focused directly on the window, as if she too could sense the danger outside. She didn't cry. Instead, she made soft cooing sounds that seemed to have a calming effect on the white wolf. That's when Marcus noticed something extraordinary. The temperature inside the cabin was rising, not from the fire but from somewhere else. The baby herself seemed to be generating warmth, her small body radiating heat like a tiny furnace. The dark wolves outside began howling in unison, not the normal communication calls of a pack, but something that carried harmonics that made the cabin's wooden walls vibrate. It was a sound designed to inspire terror, and it was working. But the white wolf's response was immediate and defiant. Its own howl shattered the night, a sound of pure protective fury that made Marcus's ears ring. The message to the dark wolves was unmistakable. "You'll have to go through me first." The attack came without warning. 7 black shapes launched themselves at the cabin simultaneously, hitting the walls and door with impacts that shook the entire structure. The first dark wolf came through the window in an explosion of glass and frozen wood. Marcus barely had time to grab the baby before the white wolf intercepted the attacker mid-lep, the 2 massive forms colliding with bone-jarring force. Up close, Marcus could see that these weren't normal wolves. Their teeth were too long, too sharp, more like the fangs of a saber-toothed cat. Their claws left gouges in the cabin's wooden floor that were far deeper than any wolf should be able to make. But the white wolf was more than a match for them. Despite being outnumbered 7-1, it fought with a combination of raw power and tactical intelligence that kept the dark wolves from overwhelming their defenses. Marcus clutched the baby to his chest, looking for any way to help. The flare gun. That was his best option. He fired the first flare directly at a dark wolf trying to flank the white wolf's position. The brilliant red light seemed to cause the creature actual pain, making it retreat with a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve light. Marcus realized they don't like bright light. He began breaking furniture to feed the fireplace, building the flames as high as he could manage. The increased illumination forced the dark wolves to keep their distance, but he was running out of things to burn. The white wolf was holding its own, but Marcus could see it was taking damage. Golden blood, not the dark red of normal blood, was matting its pristine fur in several places. It was fighting a battle it couldn't win through strength alone. That's when the baby did something impossible. She began to glow, not metaphorically, literally. Her skin took on a soft luminescence that grew brighter by the second, until she was radiating light like a human lantern. The dark wolves recoiled as if they'd been struck, their coordinated attack falling apart as they scrambled to get away from the infant's radiance. The white wolf used their confusion to press its advantage, driving the pack toward the cabin's entrance. But Marcus could see more shapes moving in the forest beyond, reinforcements arriving to join the hunt. "We can't stay here," he told the white wolf, not caring how crazy it was to hold a conversation with a wild animal. "There are too many of them." The wolf looked at him with those intelligent amber eyes and actually nodded, before moving to a section of the cabin's back wall. Using its massive claws, it began tearing away wooden planks, creating an opening large enough for them to escape through. Marcus gathered the baby's supplies and followed the wolf through the improvised exit. Behind them, the dark wolves were regrouping, their howls growing more organized, more determined. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The escape from the cabin began a nightmare chase through the Yukon wilderness that tested every survival skill. Marcus had learned in 20 years of extreme weather photography why the white wolf led them along paths that existed only in its ancient memory, following routes that kept them moving despite snowdrifts that reached Marcus's chest. The baby continued to emit that soft radiance, providing just enough light to navigate by while somehow staying perfectly warm in her traditional fur wrappings. Marcus had given up trying to understand how an 8-month-old infant could survive these conditions, much less generate her own heat source. Behind them, the dark wolves maintained their pursuit with relentless patience. They didn't try to close the distance immediately. Instead, they seemed to be herding their prey towards some predetermined destination. "They're not just hunting us," Marcus panted as they paused beside a partially frozen stream. "They're driving us somewhere specific." The white wolf looked back along their trail, its amber eyes reflecting concern. It moved to the stream's edge and began breaking through the ice with its powerful paws, creating access to the flowing water beneath. Marcus understood immediately. "You want us to use the stream to mask our scent." Following the water would be brutally cold and dangerous, but it was their best chance of throwing off the pursuit. Marcus stripped off his outer jacket and wrapped it around the baby, creating an additional layer of protection before stepping into the icy water. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. The stream was barely above freezing, and within seconds, Marcus's legs were numb from the knees down. But the white wolf was already moving downstream, and he had no choice but to follow. They walked through the water for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. The baby never cried, never fussed, just watched the world around her with those impossibly alert amber eyes. When they finally climbed out onto the far bank, Marcus's legs were so numb he could barely stand. But their strategy had worked. The howling behind them was growing more distant and confused. The white wolf led them to a shelter formed by fallen logs and windblown snow. It wasn't much protection from the elements, but it was hidden and defensible. As Marcus tried to restore feeling to his feet, he noticed something that made his photographer's eye take notice. The baby's glow was stronger now, and in its light, he could see that the white wolf's injuries were healing. The golden blood had stopped flowing, and some of the smaller cuts were actually closing as he watched. "What are you?" he whispered to the infant. "What are both of you?" The baby reached out with one tiny hand, touching his cheek with fingers that felt fever-warm despite the sub-zero air. For just a moment, Marcus felt a sensation like electricity running through his nervous system, and the numbness in his feet began to recede. The white wolf made a soft whining sound. Not distress, but communication. It was looking back the way they'd come, ears pricked forward with intense focus. Marcus followed its gaze and felt his heart sink. Lights were moving through the forest, not the natural yellow of wolf eyes, but the harsh white beams of powerful flashlights. The dark wolves had found human allies. The search team that emerged from the forest looked like military special operations, 6 figures in advanced cold weather gear, moving with tactical precision through terrain that should have stopped civilian personnel. They carried weapons that Marcus didn't recognize, devices that looked more like scientific instruments than traditional firearms. "Thermal imaging shows 3 heat signatures in this area," came a voice through radio static. "1 adult human, 1 infant, and something large that's not reading as normal mammalian body temperature." Marcus pressed deeper into their hiding spot, holding the baby close while the white wolf positioned itself between them and the approaching hunters. The infant seemed to understand the danger. Her glow dimmed to barely visible levels, though she remained perfectly warm to the touch. Through gaps in their shelter, Marcus watched the team spread out in a search pattern. Their leader, a woman with short blonde hair visible beneath her tactical helmet, was studying some kind of handheld device with a screen. "The genetic tracker is getting stronger readings," she reported. "Subject X-47 is definitely in this immediate area." Subject X-47, the same designation Marcus had seen on the medical papers from the crashed plane. "Remember, the infant is priority 1 for live capture," the leader continued. "The anomalous wolf is secondary, but Command wants tissue samples if possible." They weren't just hunting the baby, they were hunting both her and the white wolf, and they had technology specifically designed for tracking them. Marcus realized with growing horror that this wasn't a rescue operation. These people had been expecting the plane to crash, had been waiting for exactly this situation. The baby had been kidnapped from the hospital, not transported for treatment. One of the hunters was approaching their hiding spot, his thermal scanner showing increasing readings. The white wolf's muscles bunched for an attack, but Marcus knew that 6 armed soldiers would overwhelm even the massive predator. They needed a distraction. Marcus still had 2 flares left in his emergency gun. If he could create enough chaos, maybe the wolf and baby could escape while the soldiers were dealing with him. He was about to make his move when something extraordinary happened. The dark wolves attacked the human hunters. The coordinated assault came from 3 directions simultaneously, 7 massive black forms launching themselves at the tactical team with silent efficiency. Whatever alliance had existed between the human hunters and the supernatural wolves had apparently ended. The battle was brief but vicious. The soldiers' weapons seemed effective against the dark wolves, dropping 2 of them with weapons that fired some kind of energy discharge rather than bullets. But the remaining 5 creatures fought with desperate fury, as if they knew this was their last chance. In the chaos, Marcus saw his opportunity. The white wolf had reached the same conclusion. While the soldiers were distracted, they could slip away into the deeper forest. They moved like ghosts through the snow, the baby's dimmed glow providing just enough light to navigate without giving away their position. Behind them, the sounds of battle gradually faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the Arctic night. But Marcus knew their escape was temporary. Both the supernatural hunters and the human ones were still out there, and both groups wanted the baby for their own purposes. 3 hours before dawn, they reached an abandoned weather station, one of hundreds of automatic monitoring posts scattered across the Canadian North. The white wolf had led them directly to it, suggesting this wasn't the first time it had used such shelters. Inside the small concrete building, Marcus found basic supplies, emergency food, medical kit, and most importantly, a working radio capable of reaching emergency frequencies. While the white wolf stood guard at the entrance, Marcus tried to piece together what he'd learned about their situation. The baby, Subject X-47, according to the military hunters, had been a patient at Vancouver Children's Hospital. Someone had arranged to transport her to a government research facility, but the plane had crashed before reaching its destination. Now both human agents and supernatural creatures were hunting her, each group apparently wanting her for different reasons. Marcus activated the radio and began scanning emergency frequencies, looking for any official response to the plane crash. What he found made his blood run cold. Search for missing research subject has been expanded to include civilian personnel in the area. Subject X-47 is to be considered extremely dangerous due to unknown genetic modifications. Any civilian contact should be reported immediately to Sector 7 Command. The broadcast continued with a description that matched the baby exactly, but portrayed her as some kind of bioweapon rather than an innocent infant. Marcus looked at the child sleeping peacefully in her fur wrappings, still glowing with that soft, warm light. Dangerous. She was the most obviously helpless thing he'd ever encountered, unless he thought about her unusual body temperature, her calm behavior in impossible circumstances, the way she seemed to communicate with the white wolf, the way her glow had driven off the dark wolves and somehow helped heal both his frostbite and the wolf's injuries. What if she wasn't just an ordinary baby who happened to survive a plane crash? Marcus switched to a different radio frequency, one used by indigenous communities in the region. If anyone would understand what he'd witnessed, it would be the people who'd lived in this land for thousands of years. This is Marcus Rivera broadcasting on emergency frequency 7. I'm with an infant and a large white wolf, approximately 50 miles northeast of Dawson Creek. We're being hunted by both government agents and something else. If anyone can hear this, we need help understanding what's happening. The response came immediately, in accented English that carried the authority of age and wisdom. This is Elder Joseph Crowfeather of the Gwich'in Nation. We have been expecting your call. Photographer man, the spirits told us the White Guardian would return when the shadow hunters grew bold enough to take children from their families. Marcus's hands shook as he held the radio. You know about this. The baby is not what your government thinks she is, the elder replied. She carries old blood, old power that some people want to study and others want to destroy. But the White Guardian chose her, and that means she has a destiny your scientists cannot understand. What kind of destiny? To stand between the world of light and the world of shadow, just as her bloodline has done for generations. But first, she must reach the sacred grove where the old ceremonies can protect her until she comes of age. Marcus looked at the white wolf, who was listening to every word with obvious intelligence. How do we reach this sacred grove? Follow the White Guardian. It knows the way. But be warned, the shadow hunters grow stronger as you approach. They know that if the child reaches the sacred grove, their power will be broken forever. The radio crackled with static, then went silent. But Elder Crowfeather's words echoed in Marcus's mind as he prepared for the next phase of their desperate journey. Dawn broke over the Yukon wilderness with a display of aurora borealis that seemed impossible at this latitude and season. Ribbons of green and gold light danced across the sky, pulsing in rhythm with the baby's heartbeat as she slept against Marcus's chest. The white wolf had led them through the night to higher ground, a series of ancient hills that predated the last ice age. The landscape here felt different, charged with an energy that made Marcus's photographer instincts tingle. This was a place where something significant was going to happen. They reached the crest of the highest hill just as the sun touched the horizon, and Marcus gasped at what he saw below them. The sacred grove was a perfect circle of massive pine trees, each one at least 300 years old, arranged in a pattern that was obviously artificial. At the center of the circle stood a single white tree, not covered in snow, but actually white wood. its bark gleaming like polished bone in the aurora light. How is that possible? Marcus breathed. White wood like that had been extinct in North America for thousands of years. The baby stirred in her wrappings, opening those amber eyes to look directly at the sacred grove for the first time since he'd found her. She made normal baby sounds, soft coos and gurgles of what sounded like happiness. The white wolf began descending toward the grove, but its pace was more cautious now. Its ears were pricked forward, scanning for threats in the unusual landscape ahead. They were halfway down the hillside when the trap was sprung. The human hunters rose from concealment all around the grove. Not the 6 from before, but at least 20 soldiers in advanced camouflage that had made them invisible until they moved. Their leader, the blonde woman Marcus had seen the night before, stepped into the open with a device that looked like a cross between a rifle and a satellite dish. "End of the line," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "Subject X-47 comes with us, and the anomalous wolf becomes a research specimen. You can walk away from this, photographer. This isn't your fight." Marcus looked at the baby in his arms, then at the white wolf standing protectively beside him. Maybe it hadn't started as his fight, but it was now. "Her name isn't Subject X-47, he called back. "She's just a baby, and she doesn't belong in a laboratory. That baby is carrying genetic modifications that could revolutionize human evolution," the commander replied. "The power she's manifesting could be replicated, studied, controlled. Too important to waste on indigenous superstitions about sacred groves and guardian spirits." The white wolf growled, a sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The baby's glow began to intensify, not the soft radiance of before, but something brighter, more focused. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Marcus said, backing toward the grove. "This isn't about genetics or evolution. This is about something much older, much more important." The commander raised her weapon-like device. "Stand down, or we'll take her by force. This is your final warning." That's when the dark wolves attacked for the second time. But this time, they weren't attacking Marcus and the baby. They were attacking the human soldiers. The battle between the military unit and the dark wolves was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. The soldiers' energy weapons could hurt the supernatural creatures, but the dark wolves fought with desperate cunning, using the terrain and their superior speed to avoid direct confrontations. In the chaos, Marcus ran for the sacred grove with the baby and the white wolf. They reached the outer circle of ancient pines, just as the first dark wolf broke through the soldiers' defensive line. The moment they crossed into the grove, everything changed. The baby's glow exploded outward, filling the entire circle with aurora light that seemed to come from the ground itself. The white tree at the center began to shine like a beacon, its branches swaying despite the absence of any wind. The dark wolves stopped at the grove's edge, unable or unwilling to cross into the sacred space. The human soldiers found their weapons malfunctioning, electronic systems shutting down as they approached the circle of pines. "Electromagnetic interference," the commander shouted to her men. "Some kind of natural phenomenon. Switch to conventional weapons." But when they tried to enter the grove with traditional firearms, they encountered an invisible barrier that stopped them as effectively as a concrete wall. The sacred grove was protecting itself and everyone inside it. Marcus found himself standing beside the white tree with the baby in his arms, surrounded by aurora light that seemed to pulse with living intelligence. The infant was no longer just glowing. She was part of the light show, her small form radiating patterns that matched the dancing colors in the sky. The white wolf approached the tree and, incredibly, began to speak. Not in words, but in concepts that appeared directly in Marcus's mind. "The child has reached the place of awakening. Here, she will be safe until the time comes for her to fulfill her destiny. But the shadow hunters and the human hunters will not give up easily. They will find other ways to reach her." Marcus looked around at their situation, surrounded by enemies, trapped in a mystical grove that might protect them temporarily but couldn't hide them forever. "What happens now?" he asked, speaking aloud to the wolf. "Now we wait for the old ceremonies to begin. The Gwich'in nation has been preparing for this day for generations. When the aurora light reaches its peak, the child will be bonded to the spirits of this place, making her impossible to track or capture by conventional means." Outside the grove, the battle between soldiers and dark wolves was reaching a stalemate. Neither side could penetrate the sacred space, but both were settling in for a siege. Marcus realized they were about to witness something that had unhappened for centuries. The awakening of a power that could shift the balance between the natural world and those who would exploit it. As the aurora light reached its zenith, Marcus heard the sound of approaching aircraft, helicopters carrying what sounded like an entire military company. The government wasn't giving up on capturing Subject X-47, but from the opposite direction came another sound: drums, voices singing in languages that predated European contact with North America. The indigenous communities Elder Crow Feather had promised were arriving to complete the ceremony. Figures emerged from the forest. Not soldiers, but people dressed in traditional ceremonial clothing, men and women of various ages, carrying items that Marcus's anthropological training recognized as sacred objects. Eagle feathers, sage bundles, carved masks that depicted animals with almost supernatural accuracy. Elder Crowfeather led the group, his weathered face paint with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the aurora light. He approached the edge of the sacred grove and spoke in a voice that carried despite the chaos around them. The child has come home to the place where she belongs. No government, no shadow creature, no force of darkness can claim what the spirits have chosen to protect. The baby in Marcus's arms began to change, not physically, but energetically. Her glow was becoming more complex, more purposeful, as if she was communicating with forces beyond human understanding. The white wolf moved to stand directly beside the white tree, its massive form beginning to shimmer like a mirage. As Marcus watched in amazement, other figures began to appear around the tree. Translucent forms of wolves, bears, eagles, and other creatures, all watching the ceremony with obvious intelligence. Spirit guardians, Elder Crowfeather explained, his voice somehow audible despite the increasing noise from the military helicopters. They have been waiting for this moment, when the boundary between worlds becomes thin enough for the old magic to work. The baby reached out with one tiny hand toward the white tree, and when her fingers touched the ancient bark, everything exploded into light. Not harmful light, but something that seemed to rewrite reality itself. The sacred grove expanded, its boundaries pushing outward until they encompassed the entire hilltop. The dark wolves were caught within the expanding circle and instantly transformed, their black fur becoming silver, their malevolent yellow eyes shifting to natural wolf amber. The military weapons failed completely, not just malfunctioning but actually dissolving into component atoms as the sacred energy passed through them. The shadow corruption has been cleansed, the white wolf's voice said in Marcus's mind. The dark hunters have been returned to their true nature, and the child is now beyond the reach of those who would use her power for destructive purposes. Marcus looked down at the baby and saw that she was no longer glowing. Instead, she looked like a perfectly normal, healthy infant except for those remarkable amber eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. What happens to her now? He asked Elder Crowfeather. Now she grows up protected by the spirits, raised by people who understand her true nature. When she comes of age, she will choose whether to embrace her destiny as a guardian between worlds, or to live as a normal human. And what about me? Elder Crowfeather smiled. You have been changed by this experience. Photographer, you have seen the world behind the world. That knowledge comes with responsibility. As the aurora light began to fade and normal dawn broke over the Yukon wilderness, Marcus realized his old life was over. He could never go back to simply documenting wildlife after witnessing the magic that existed alongside the natural world. The white wolf approached him one final time, its amber eyes meeting his with obvious intelligence and gratitude. Thank you, it said, not in words but in understanding that passed directly from spirit to spirit. You chose to protect the innocent when you could have walked away. That choice has made you part of something larger than yourself. The great wolf turned and walked into the forest, fading like morning mist until only its paw prints in the snow remained as evidence it had ever existed. Marcus looked around at the sacred grove, now returned to its normal size, and at the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. The military forces were retreating, their mission failed, and their equipment mysteriously inoperative. The formerly dark wolves were disappearing into the wilderness, their true nature restored. So what happens now? He asked Elder Crowfeather. Now we go home, the elder replied, and you learn what it means to be a guardian in the modern world. As they walked down from the sacred hilltop, Marcus realized he was beginning the greatest adventure of his life, one that would take him far beyond photography into a world where ancient magic still protected those who needed it most. The baby opened her amber eyes and smiled at him, a perfectly normal expression that somehow carried the wisdom of ages. The snow wolf and the baby had found their way home. This incredible true tale of supernatural guardianship and the power of ancient magic has left us all speechless. If the story of the snow wolf's protection and the baby's mystical awakening moved you, smash that like button and subscribe to Arctic Howl for more unbelievable stories where the natural world reveals its deepest secrets. Drop a comment below. Do you believe there are still places where old magic protects the innocent? Have you ever witnessed something that science couldn't explain? Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures into the hidden world where legends walk among us.